Hey guys, welcome back for another episode. Today we're going to be continuing working on the Grand Cherokee. Got the heads off and the intake off. We're going to go ahead and try to clean up we've already cleaned up the bottom of the heads with an abrasive disc on both of them. Just a very light abrasive disc. And what we're going to do today is take the valve springs apart and go ahead and replace the valve seals while we have the heads off. So we're going to do that on both heads, and then we're going to try to get the engine bay cleaned up here and ready to get the heads put back on. So we're gonna take you guys along for that. All right, so we got the driver's side head on the bench here, and what we're going to do is take these rocker assemblies off here. And then we'll use this Harbor Freight spring compressor to go ahead and remove these springs. And then try to get these valve seals in here. So I'm just going to loosen all these up real quick and then come back with my electric impact and go ahead and take them all off. And I got a Chilton's book for this that I'll be using to like kind of get the torque specs and reassembly for all this stuff. So this is a pretty tight fit. Seems like machine surface that should probably go back in there the same way. Cool. So I almost had my awning blow over out there. So yeah, you want to make sure don't lose those. I'm just going to be doing them one at a time here. So alrighty. You can't really see that, but just stick the halves back in. You might have to compress it a little bit and they'll catch. Perfect, and there's one down, and I'm just going to go ahead and do the rest of this head. Alright, now that that's done, we're going to go ahead and replace all four of these spark plugs here. I think I'm going to leave these rocker assemblies off until we get them into the vehicle, just to make it easier to put the heads on. I left them on pulling them off, and I had to pull the head over the push rods. in order to prevent damaging the push rods. So we'll get these spark plugs swapped off, and then I think I might actually go ahead and work towards reinstalling this head, which means I need to go ahead and clean up the mating surface on the Jeep, clean up this valve gasket surface here, and do one last pass over on all these surfaces and make sure they're clean and nice and smooth before we get it back in there. Alright, so this is what the new spark plugs look like in the head. I haven't cleaned up the valves or the exhaust or intake valves at all on this head, and we really don't have a whole lot of carbon buildup on those. So we're just going to kind of go over all these surfaces, make sure they're nice and cleaned up. What we're going to do first is go over to the Jeep, and we'll put you guys on a time lapse. We're going to get some of this stuff out of the way here, but we're just going to, we kind of scraped all these surfaces. Now we're going to, like I said, clear all this as much as we can out, and then go through with probably a roll lock and get these nice and cleaned up, and then come back in with the vacuum and clean out the cylinders, and then hopefully we can get in up here with like a cone wire brush and get some of the carbon buildup off the top of the cylinders before we you know, do anything with those. Alright, so we just got the head surface pretty much cleaned off. We also took a little wire brush just to the top of the piston. You want to avoid hitting the sides of the cylinders when you're doing that. That's why I wasn't too worried about getting it all off, so that, you know, you don't have any blow-by issues in the future. This one's a little harder to see, but what we're going to do now is just go back into the head, and we're going to clean up all the mating surfaces on here, intake, exhaust, and the head sealing surface. We're going to get that all cleaned up, and then we'll start moving towards reinstalling this head. Alright, so we got the sealing surfaces of the head all cleaned up. Valve cover gasket, intake, head gasket sealing surface, and then exhaust manifolds are right here in between the spark plugs. So we're going to go ahead and get ready to throw this thing in. Alright, well, we went ahead and made a mistake right off the bat. You know, right here, that backside over there, as we were trying to swing it in, we accidentally caught the corner of that gasket with the head. So, you know, we're gonna have to get another head gasket, because that's unacceptable. So unfortunately for me, this is essentially a customer vehicle, even though it was mine and I'm giving it away. But this is gonna cost me money, unfortunately, but you know, it is what it is. So I actually went back and just dry fit this head without a gasket in there, and what I found out was where this power steering pump was sitting, it was stopping me from like pushing it far enough ahead and getting it to sit on the dowels. So you know, hopefully we won't make that mistake again. All right, so this is where we're going to be calling it for today. I went ahead and did all the valve seals on this head and then cleaned it up, and then what I did was I went ahead and put this junk, one of the gaskets that we had junked up, in there as I fed the head in, seeing as how I didn't want it to, you know, the mating surfaces to contact each other and dig in real hard and mess one of the mating surfaces up, because this engine is really tight in this engine bay, so it was even harder to get this side on than it was this side. So what we'll do once we get the new head gaskets in here in a couple of days is when we're supposed to be getting them. We're just going to kind of take them off on the side, slide the gasket in, take this off, slide the gasket in, then I'll have my buddy, hopefully we can gently set it on to where we don't, you know, to where we're confident that we didn't damage the head gaskets at all, and then we'll just continue wrapping it up from there.
So my friend ended up coming over and we were able to get the head gaskets mounted and I was able to torque the head down. And then what we're doing here is installing the push rods. I didn't keep mine in any particular order, that they came out of. I think if I were to do this particular engine again or this setup again, I would make sure to keep the push rods in the order that they came out, just so that the wear patterns were consistent. And then we're going to go ahead and reinstall the rocker assemblies back onto the engine. So the nice thing about this being hydraulic lifters is that we don't need to go back and do an overhead. If it was a normal style, I'm not sure what the technical term is, but we would have to go back and do an overhead once we got the rockers installed. So one of the things we had previously done was we got the exhaust heat shields mounted on both the left and right side that you can see there. And then now what I'm doing is I'm applying high tack to both the mounting surface of the head for the valve cover and as well as the bottom side of the valve cover. I've also cleaned off the mating surface of the valve cover as well. I like to put high tack on there just because it's a little bit of extra security to prevent from leaks, especially because there's so much stuff covering on these new engines. I do prefer to use like a copper coat or RTV, but high tack was what I had at this point in time. So I go ahead and I tighten them down with my electric ratchet, or I lightly tighten them down. I don't actually let it bite and tighten down all the way, and then I'll come back with a hand ratchet and tighten them down to feel, because I like to tighten them down maybe a little bit more than spec, but just so that they're snug. You also got to be careful on some of the older valve covers that you don't warp the mounting surface itself, because that'll also cause leaks.
Okay, so I didn't really plan on filming me doing this plenum gasket, which is this plate right here on the bottom of the intake manifold. But until I looked inside, you can see in here that there's been a decent amount of oil inside of this intake coming up through this plenum gasket. You can see, oil sitting inside those runners pretty much everywhere in here. And that's because this plenum gasket sits right above here, I'll just show you. Right here, it sits right above this where the push rods are, and this is full of oil pretty much all the time. So on these 5.2 liter engines, 5.3, I can't even remember, this is a very common problem to be sucking in oil into this plenum gasket.
So we went ahead and installed the new distributor cap, new spark plug wires, got those ran to the correct cylinders, and then we got the intake gaskets installed. The ones that mate from the valley to the head, you're going to want to make sure to put some silicone or some RTV on the edges there so that you don't have oil leaking right at that point. You're going to want to take the installation process here a little bit slow, because you're going to need to feed that wiring harness up over the injector harness. And then also you want to make sure that your intake manifold itself doesn't dislodge those intake gaskets at the very end, located near the distributor, and as well as the front, located near like the water pump.
Alright, so it's getting a little dark, but we still got to come through and torque the intake manifold. But the reason I had left this valve cover off was because of this exhaust recirculation line that threads into the back of the intake manifold. You can kind of see it snaking around. I had to take the heat shield back off and completely remove this side of it in order to get the threads to start on the back of the intake manifold. So that was really a pain in the butt. But once you get it threaded all the way in, if you have, I use this 7/8 angle wrench to help me tighten that bung down on the back.
So I went ahead and skipped past me installing all the accessory brackets that mount the alternator and the AC and all that stuff. It's really hard to get a good view because my hands are always in the way at that point. So we're topping off fluids right now. Gonna be reinstalling the intake manifold. We'll get the battery back on, and then essentially at that point we're ready to fire this thing up and see how it runs. Also, one really important thing while reinstalling all this stuff is making sure you have all the vacuum lines in the proper location. You're going to want to run those when you're running the wiring around the intake manifold. Mine were all cracked out and brittle, so I had to replace a lot of them and make some new connections.
Alright, so this is going to be the first test fire. Let me check the oil real quick. It's reading a little over full, but we're also on a pretty good slope. So we'll go ahead and give her a go. The security system went off, shut the fuel off. Since the battery died. Now would be a good time to check the leaks. Yep. Yeah, I bet. Huh? There's still a bunch of coolant in the exhaust. So hopefully that's it. Alright, well, just ran the heck out of her around the block. So far it's looking pretty good. Felt pretty good. Not sure how I feel about how it sounds, but I honestly don't really remember how it sounded before. One of the more important parts is no more smoke.
Thank you guys very much for watching the video.